This is a research proposal for implementation problems with PBIS by James McInnes for EDUF 7116, Applied Educational Research. Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, or PBIS as it is known, is a framework or approach for assisting school personnel in adopting and organizing evidence-based behavioral interventions into an integrated continuum that enhances academic and social behavior outcomes for all students. It has become more popular across the state of Georgia as the State Department of Education has almost mandated its use. While the state's PBIS strategic plan does not specifically note that PBIS is mandatory for each district, the plan does provide for becoming a PBIS state. It is also mentioned in the state response to intervention plan no less than 19 times as a means to implementing RTI. Because of this widespread use, it is important to know what works and what does not work when it comes to the implementation of the PBIS program. Therefore, this research project will focus on what hindrances there are to the effective implementation of the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports program. And as a result of finding the problems associated with the program, the research will also reveal what works to help implement the program. The overwhelming majority of research done on PBIS casts the program in a positive light. It mostly concludes PBIS as a whole works, if implemented with fidelity. However, common sense should tell one that there are other implementation pitfalls for which schools and systems should look out. According to the literature review completed by Marin and Fils, teachers are to deliver appropriate instruction and to ensure optimal student achievement, and that discipline and behavior disruptions affect the quality and quantity of instruction inside American schools. Therefore, it is important to keep disruptions to a minimum. The first item to look at is training, which obviously happens before the implementation of PBIS within a school or system. Schools studied either received training only, non-intensive sites, or training and on-site coaching, or intensive sites. There was a significant difference between these two types of sites. This difference could be a determining factor in successful implementation of PBIS. The results were significant. The author's results were undeniable. It can be inferred that schools that received training plus on-site coaching had higher QDIs than the schools that received training only. If a school or system is able to get PBIS up and running, is it sustainable? This is one of two key factors when buying anything. Can it be maintained, and is it sustainable? In a 2012 study, Coffey and Horner found out what makes PBIS sustainable. Participants in this study completed a sustainability survey, which determined the presence of 8 sustainability features as they related to sustaining school-wide positive behavior supports. Results from a logistic regression analysis demonstrate that together the sustainability features of administrative support combined with communication and database decision-making create the best fitting model of sustainability for school-wide PBIS. The 8 sustainability features are 1. Contextually appropriate innovation. 2. Staff buy-in. 3. A shared vision. 4. Administrative support. 5. Leadership at various levels. 6. Ongoing technical assistance. 7. Database decision-making and sharing. And 8. Continuous regeneration. The authors found the 3 most important features were administrative support, communication, and database decision-making. As a result of Coffey and Horner's findings, one can find where the problems can arise. According to the research, administrative support and communication played the largest role when placed together. Hindrances to implementation would be lack of administrative support coupled with poor communication plus decision-making not based on data. In a 2009 study, Flannery and Sagai defined the critical features of SWPBIS, school-wide PBIS, and then present results from a survey of a sample of high schools implementing SWPBS. They use survey results as a foundation from which to provide guidelines to school teams attempting to implement SWPBIS in high schools. This means the authors found out how problems can arise in the PBIS implementation in high schools. Flannery and Sagai found 12 guidelines to use when implementing PBIS. The guidelines to guide decisions and actions are 1. Use data to guide decision making. 2. Establish school discipline as instruments for academic and behavioral success. 3. Make decisions that are linked to important and measurable outcomes. 4. Utilize research-validated practices, interventions, and strategies. 5. Emphasize an instructional approach to behavior management. 6. Emphasize prevention. 7. Integrate initiatives, programs, interventions that have common outcomes. 8. Adapt products, activities, actions, etc. to align with cultural and contextual characteristics of local environment, e.g. family, neighborhood, community. 9. Build and sustain a continuum of behavior support. 10. Consider and implement school-wide practices and systems for all students, all staff, and all settings. 11. Evaluate continuously. 12. Coordinate efforts with a school-wide leadership team. The first, 10th, and 12th items correlate nicely with the more recent research with Coffey and Horner. Looking at these guidelines, it is easy for one to say just do the opposite, and there are the pitfalls. However, these guidelines are there to guide decision-making and actions. It still requires fidelity to implement the program. The interesting part of this research is point 11, evaluate continuously. This is something that is left out of most of the other research. In order to see if the program is successful, schools and systems will have to evaluate along the way. This may seem like common sense, but most research only focuses on one aspect of implementation, whereas these guidelines focus on what is needed to make PBIS work. While there are these guidelines put forth by one of the more popular behavior researchers like Sagai, the implementation of PBIS beyond the walls of a K-12 setting is a little more challenging. For instance, in a preschool setting, implementers have organizational differences between preschool and K-12 settings, philosophical and curricular practices, developmental levels of preschoolers, limited behavioral expertise and consultation resources, and organizational cultures that are unfamiliar with database decision-making. Because of these differences in setting, we learn the program may need to be adapted based on age. Fry et al. Acknowledged conceptual models and new measurement instruments are needed to improve the feasibility and usability of positive behavior support efforts in early childhood contexts. The researchers in this study noted that a mixed methods approach would be more trustworthy. As a result, the researchers decided to use focus groups. Because of this, the authors of the study were able to determine major themes with challenges associated with PBIS in a preschool setting. Once again, communication came up as a challenge. The authors noted lack of a shared vision for effort and ineffective communication appeared to have created frustration for many participants. Confusion about instructional expectations, appropriate use of program resources, and linkage of the effort to previously implemented initiatives were also cited as programs' concerns. There are even more challenges to preschool implementation of PBIS in a rural setting. Steed, Muscott, and Rode point out a number of items to be aware of in this particular setting. The one big factor is the large geographical area the preschool most likely serves. This increases the cost of everything. There is also the issue of widespread poverty in rural areas. While these problems seem insurmountable, this study over a 3-year period indicates that when teachers implement the program with fidelity, including these factors, expectations defined, behavioral expectations taught, responses to appropriate and challenging behavior, organized and predictable environment, monitoring and decision-making, family involvement, management, and program support, PBIS can work. The research so far has shown how to implement, adapt, and sustain the positive behavioral interventions and supports program at multiple levels. However, what would it take to bring a model PBIS school down? One group of researchers looked at a PBIS program over a 3-year period. Researchers explored the extent to which a common measure of perceived implementation of critical features of PBIS predicted fidelity and implementation 3 years later. Researchers decided to focus on 3 years down the road because sustainability is or was defined by continuing the program after the withdrawal of resources. Also, implementation without fidelity could lead to multiple interventions being tried out and costing more money and leading to negative attitudes in staff about the interventions. Matthews et al. Noted sustained implementation of effective multi-year school-based preventative practices should be identified as a key goal at the onset of planning activities. The results of this quantitative study brought to light the main purpose of PBIS, that purpose being to reward or acknowledge the expected behavior. The authors point out a system of tangible rewards may be most effective when it promotes regular and specific teacher acknowledgement of student behaviors. What implementers could learn from this study is to make sure expected student behaviors are acknowledged. This study also pointed out many other factors for success. Those factors are the program framework should be school-wide, matching instruction and materials to student ability, and access to assistance and recommendations. In a 2011 study, Sagai et al. Explored culture and context during PBIS implementation. The reason for this culture and context consideration is actually quite simple. According to the author's review of the available literature, 50% of the American population by the year 2050 will consist of those who consider themselves a minority today. According to their research, these now minority students experience significantly disparate outcomes compared to their peers, such as lower achievement gains, more reactive and exclusionary disciplinary consequences, higher special education placement rates, and higher dropout rates. Therefore, cultural and contextual considerations must be made. The authors give guidelines for the contextually and culturally relevant implementation of PBIS. These guidelines allow for the PBIS leadership team to evaluate at each given step. These steps are exploration, installation, initial implementation, full implementation, and sustainability and scaling up. Without using these guidelines, the author suggests the school would not be maximizing the outcomes of the evidence-based practices that are included in the school-wide PBIS framework. Data will be drawn from longitudinal data, 2010 to 2015, that includes the School-Wide Information System, or SWIS, the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Support Surveys, data collection systems from the Statewide Longitudinal Data System, or SLDS, for the given school system, and personal interviews to determine pitfalls in the implementation of school-wide PBIS. The sample will comprise all schools that completed the School-Wide Evaluation Tool, or SET. The PBIS data provides an index of school demographics and PBIS implementation quality, or a proper responses to the set. And the SWIS data set provides information about every office disciplinary referral, or ODR, in a given school year. Because student data is logged by ODRs, it is impossible to know if a student is missing in a given year because he left the school or because he did not commit any offenses. For this reason, longitudinal examination of the student level data would be problematic. Given this study's focus on the problems which hinder PBIS implementation, the fourth year of data, 2013 to 2014, was selected for the present study, ensuring that every school had been implementing PBIS for the last 2 years. Thus far, only one study has examined the length of time for full implementation of PBIS, finding that it took 2 to 5 years for the majority of schools to be implementing with fidelity. Thus, the fourth year of data should provide the most representative indices of implementation quality for each school, making it appropriate for this study. In the remainder of the paper, only data from the fourth year would be reported. No data was available on students with no ODRs, so they are not included in the student level analyses or sample characteristics described. The School-Wide Evaluation Tool is a 28-item multi-method, multi-informant, site-based evaluation tool designed to assess the implementation quality of school-wide PBIS. Trained staff at each school administer and score the set, which includes observations, interviews with administrators, students, and school staff, and products provided by the school, like referral forms. The 28 set items are scored on a 0 to 2 scale, 0 meaning not implemented, 1 partially implemented, and 2 fully implemented. Consistent with standard procedure, the 28 items were aggregated into 7 theoretical components of PBIS implementation quality. Construct validity of the set will be established by correlations with a measure of school-wide behavior support with implementation completed by faculty and staff, and internal validity has been demonstrated with higher intercorrelations among factors of the set by Horner et al. To maintain external validity, the subscales employed in the standard practice were used here. Expectations defined, expectations taught, reward system, violation system, monitoring and decision making, gathering and using student behavioral data to guide decision making, management, and 2 items from district level support will be considered separately: district level support and budget district level support. Summary scores will be created for each subscale as the percentage of possible points earned, and an overall implementation score is computed as the mean of the subscales. The set score is an indicator of PBIS implementation fidelity, which is at least 80% of the set items and on at least 80% of the items assessing expectations taught. Each time a student was referred to the office for a problem behavior, information about the ODR was recorded, like the date, time, location, and behavior, using SWIS. To ensure valid and reliable ODR data, the system met a series of requirements like attendance at training and adoption of a standardized ODR form before using SWIS, the internet-based information system for collecting the ODR data for PBIS. The training allowed all schools to adopt the same definition of problem behaviors. The widespread use of ODRs makes them a practical and valuable standardized instrument across schools. Although there is some potential for teacher bias in documentation, like variability in teachers' tolerance for misbehavior, the use of ODRs are a reliable tool to monitor student problem behaviors for purposes of decision-making in schools. ODRs have been linked to poor student outcomes such as poor academic achievement, substance use, and teacher reports of classroom disruptiveness. The present study focuses on 3 broad categories of problem behaviors. An aggregate count was computed for per student of the number of ODRs received in each category. Aggression and violence referred to behaviors intended to threaten, intimidate, or harm others, such as abusive language, bullying, and possession of a weapon. Defiance refers to behaviors that violate school rules or disrupt classroom functioning, such as truancy, insubordination, or cheating. And drug use or possession is the use of any drug and or the possession of any drug or drug paraphernalia. Finally, the personal interviews will serve a dual purpose. While questions about PBIS implementation will be answered, the main purpose of the personal interview will be to elicit responses about the problems implementing the program. While the 4th year is being studied, these interviews will look for reasons as to why the PBIS program, fully or not fully implemented, was not in place sooner, or why it is still not fully implemented. In other words, what is holding the program back from being fully implemented within its first 2 years? These interviews will be conducted via phone, internet chat, and in person, whichever is more convenient. Each interviewer will be given a script which specifically asks what the teachers and administrators did not like about the program, and if that played a role in how they implemented the program. The responses will be categorized to show correlations with data obtained from SWIS and SET responses. To get a descriptive picture of PBIS implementation, percentages of schools within the school system fully implementing each of the PBIS components will be reported. To identify the ingredients of a successful PBIS implementation, multi-level models will be computed, predicting frequency of each ODR type, like aggression, defiance, and drug-related, for all students with at least one ODR. Obviously, students without any ODRs were excluded from the study. Predictors in these models will include set factors representing the core PBIS components. Student gender and IEP status will be tested as moderators of the school-level variables. Lastly, school characteristics like size and level will be looked at to predict implementation quality of the successful traits.